Welcome to Canadian Justice. I'm Christine Van Gyn. It's a new year, and I wanted to spend some time talking to the leaders of some of my favorite legal charities and organizations about what they did in 2022 and what they are looking forward to in 2023. Today's guest is the National Director of the Runnymede Society, Kris Kinsinger. Now, Runnymede is a project of the Canadian Constitution Foundation, which is the legal charity I work for, and they play a unique and fascinating role in the development of Canada's legal culture. I am so excited for this conversation about what the Runnymede Society is and what they want to achieve. Kris, thanks so much for joining me today. I'm just thrilled to be having this conversation. Let's start from the basics. What is the Runnymede Society, and maybe why is it called that? Because it's not named after a street in Toronto.
No, it's absolutely not. It's not named after the subway station either. So the Runnymede Society, Christine, is a national organization in Canada that is made up of law students and lawyers and professors who share an underlying commitment to the principles of constitutionalism, the rule of law, and fundamental freedoms. Runnymede was first started in 2016, primarily as a student organization. But since that time, it has grown, and we have had lawyers join our ranks, and as I said, law professors, to the point where we now have chapters throughout the country. We have 19 student chapters and 7 lawyer chapters, and those numbers are just growing. As to why it's called Runnymede, it's named after the fields of Runnymede in England, which is where famously King John was forced to sign Magna Carta, which really begins the history of English constitutionalism and British constitutionalism. And of course, that has fed into the development of Canadian constitutionalism, because in Canada, we have a constitution that is similar in principle to that of the United Kingdom.
Such an important piece of history.
Absolutely.
And the development of Western civilization as we know it, that I think a lot of people miss out on when they hear the name of the organization. It's so important. Now, the principles that you talked about, constitutionalism, fundamental freedoms, and the rule of law. Can you maybe just speak briefly about what some of those terms mean?
Well, the rule of law is really kind of the starting point. And again, when we go back to Magna Carta, this really marks the beginning of the rule of law, because with Magna Carta, the powers of the king in England were circumscribed. And really at its core, that's what the rule of law stands for. It stands against the exercise of arbitrary authority. And it states that those in authority have to govern in accordance with the law. Constitutionalism is sort of an outflow of that, and it states that that the institutions of the state have to be governed in accordance with the principles and the provisions that are laid out in the Constitution. And of course, some of those principles and provisions are fundamental freedoms. They're guaranteed in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms under Section 2, but they predate the Charter as well, Christine.
Yeah.
And they go back to the very nature of the institutions that we have, of having parliamentary governance and all of these things. You can't have parliamentary democracy without the fundamental freedoms. And so that's what Runnymede really does, is it creates a network of people who recognize the importance of these as commitments that underlie our Constitution and want to ensure that we remain committed to them in the legal academy and profession.
So you talk about Runnymede as sort of originating as a student organization. It's obviously expanded beyond that now. But why is it so important to emphasize those ideals, constitutionalism, fundamental freedoms, and the rule of law in law schools? Have law schools maybe been de-emphasizing those ideals as part of legal education? And what role do you see Runnymede in playing in bringing this to the forefront of imagination for law students?
I think any institution is always at risk of becoming an echo chamber. And certainly you can look at any kind of, the legal academy is no different, where there is certain received wisdom, and that's been accepted. But it's good, Christine, to ensure that we are promoting intellectual diversity. And that's another big part of Runnymede's mandate, is to go into the law schools and to make sure that we are having conversations about these issues in a way that is genuinely intellectually diverse, that doesn't create echo chambers or create an alternate silo, but that brings people together from across the spectrum to discuss these principles. Because ultimately, these are things that history has shown can be taken for granted. And we continue to at times see them play out in our public discourse, that these principles are taken for granted, such as, for example, last year with the Freedom Convoy, where we saw a breakdown of law and order in Ottawa, followed by the invocation of the Emergencies Act, which many think was unjustified and did not meet the legal standards laid out in that act.
A position I absolutely share, and we share at the Canadian Constitution Foundation, since we are, after all, challenging the invocation of the Emergencies Act in federal court. And we also participated in the inquiry looking into whether or not the invocation of that law was justified. So important. We've got to go to commercial break now, but we will be right back. Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where we are discussing the Runnymede Society with National Director Kris Kinsinger. Now, Kris, Runnymede Society is an initiative at a number of Canadian law schools. What schools is Runnymede at right now, and where are you looking to expand?
So we have 19 student chapters, Christine, across Canada. So we're at almost all of the English language common law schools. But really, when we're setting our sights on the future, is we really want to make sure that we're growing in French language law schools, and particularly law schools that are training students in the civil law tradition. So we have a few right now, including at Laval University and Sherbrooke University, and we're hoping to add to that number over the next few years. And in that area, we're being assisted and guided by Professor Maxime Saint-Hilaire from Sherbrooke University, who serves as our Quebec director. So that's really where the focus is on the student chapters. We also have 7 lawyer chapters across Canada in Vancouver, Edmonton, Calgary, Winnipeg, Toronto, Montreal, and Ottawa. And we hope that that number continues to grow as well over the next few years. We've got some of the major cities covered, but of course there are lawyers in other mid-sized and smaller cities, and we want to make sure that our members who practice in those regions are also able to join up with other like-minded lawyers in a lawyer chapter.
I know Maxime, Professor Saint-Hilaire. He's been on the show, amazing person.
Mm-hmm.
So it's so wonderful that he is involved. Now, we talked about some of the illuminating principles of Runnymede Society, but what would you say is the overall mission of the organization? What's the goal? What are you trying to achieve?
So Runnymede isn't, Christine, an advocacy organization. While these are not neutral commitments that we hold, our goal is not to go in and to take positions on specific laws, pieces of legislation, cases before the court. It's to create a network of people who share those commitments, who can come together and support one another as they hold those commitments, but also to engage with people more broadly within the legal academy and the profession. So in that regard, our goal is to promote what some have called legal ecumenicism, or what others might refer to as intellectual diversity. We want to make sure that there are robust debates happening on these issues, and that we're not just assuming that everyone is on the same page. Because when we do that, we often can miss some of the finer details that are important in these discussions.
Now, when you talk about some of these debates that you've had, I know you've had some great ones at Canadian law schools, which are often put together by the students themselves. And I'll be honest, sometimes I'll watch the debates, look at the topics that you have, and it will inspire me to look into that topic and maybe do an episode of Canadian Justice about that topic. So one of the ones you had recently was at University of Toronto. I was able to attend, and it was on medical assistance in dying, which is not an uncontroversial topic.
Not at all.
What can you tell me about that event and the other topics that get covered in these events that Runnymede hosts at the law schools?
You know, Christine, we can promote intellectual diversity in different ways. And sometimes when we do that, it means that we're bringing people to a debate or a discussion that will have widely different views on a particular issue. With that particular debate that we did at U of T on medical assistance in dying, we actually brought together 2 individuals who were both opposed to medical assistance in dying, or at least to the rapid expansion of access to medical assistance in dying, but their reasons for doing so were different. And so we had
the rapid expansion being the current debate over availability of medical assistance in dying to children. The planned and now canceled or put on pause expansion of medical assistance in dying for people with mental illness.
Yes.
Anyway, that's for our viewers who might not be familiar. That's what the expansion is.
Yeah.
But what can you tell me about the different perspectives of the people who participated?
So we had 2 individuals in that event. We had Professor Yuan Zhu, who's just completing a fellowship at Oxford University, and he takes a fairly conservative stance on medical assistance in dying. And then we also had Professor Trudeau Lemons at the University of Toronto, and he approached the issue from a bit more of a progressive stance, but one that very much has a concern for the rights of people in the disabled community. And so it was really interesting to see both of these individuals come together and have common ground on their concerns about the expansion of access to medical assistance in dying, but the reasons that they gave were quite diverse in and of themselves. And so in doing that, I think we helped to promote intellectual diversity on this issue at the University of Toronto. And of course, we hope to do that at all of the schools where we have law student chapters.
And one of the other events you had this year involved speeches by a Supreme Court justice, a sitting Supreme Court justice at Osgoode. What can you tell me briefly in about 30 seconds about that? Because that's quite prestigious that the students were able to organize something like that.
At Runnymede, we're very fortunate that we've had many judges give their time to come and speak at our events. And so Justice Malcolm Rowe of the Supreme Court gave an event at Osgoode, and he was talking about the nature of legal reasoning in a liberal democracy.
Fascinating. Yeah, I wish I was able to make that one, but unfortunately I was out of town for that. But I know we're gonna have more Supreme Court justices at other events for Runnymede very soon. We will be right back. Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where we're discussing the work of the Runnymede Society with National Director Kris Kinsinger. Now, Kris, we were just talking in the last segment about how the students at Osgoode Hall Law School had organized an event with Supreme Court Justice Rowe. And that's not the only event of the year that Runnymede is putting on that's going to have Supreme Court Justice attend. There's the national conference coming up later in January. What can you tell me about that sort of marquee event for Runnymede Society? What people could expect to see there?
Runnymede's premier event every year, Christine, is our National Law and Freedom Conference, which brings together over 200 lawyers and law students and professors to hear from a variety of different panels on really pressing issues in the law and debates that are happening in the law. And then each year we culminate with a keynote address. And we're really fortunate this year that our keynote speaker is Justice Russell Brown of the Supreme Court of Canada. And he is the third sitting Supreme Court of Canada justice in a row to headline our conference. So last year we had Justice Susan Koche, and the year before that we had Justice Malcolm Rowe. So we're very excited as that's coming up. And of course, you're going to be at the conference and you're going to be moderating our panel on Section 15 equality rights. And we'll be talking about other issues, including the state of academic freedom on Canadian campuses. We'll be talking about the nature of the right against cruel and unusual punishment and other exciting topics.
Oh, it's my favorite legal event of the year.
I'm biased, but it's mine too.
It's so wonderful, and it's so prestigious that we have such high-profile speakers who are able to come to it. But I want to turn back to this issue of these are controversial topics. Yeah. These are always controversial topics that are covered by the events that the Runnymede Society puts on. So how do you strike the balance between being an intellectually curious organization that is welcoming of diverse viewpoints, but also having your own perspective? Because Runnymede is certainly, as you've said, not value neutral. Yeah. So how do you get that balance right of saying, everyone is welcome, we're going to talk about really fascinating and hot topics, we have our own perspective, that everyone is welcome? How do you achieve that?
It's a really tricky balance to get right, Christine, but I think it's important that we try to do so. So like I said earlier, Runnymede is not an advocacy group. So our purpose is not to go out and take stances on specific issues, but it is to create a network and a home for people who have these values, who have these normative commitments, so that we can promote intellectual diversity within the legal academy and profession, but also within our own organization. Because even though you might have people who come together who share these commitments, that doesn't mean that they're all going to share the same ideological labels.
You mean you and I don't agree on everything?
Shocking, I know. But that's very much the case within Runnymede. And if you look at, there are numerous issues that we can point to. One of the biggest is Section 33 of the Charter, the notwithstanding clause. And there is a range of perspectives amongst our members about whether Section 33 is desirable in general, whether it's being used wisely, whether it's being used unwisely. And I think that's really good because our members are coming at these issues with certain shared values. The nature of the debate that they're having is different than what's necessarily being held elsewhere. And so because of that, we're able to contribute to a more robust dialogue more broadly. So in this way, we're really seeking to serve the law school communities in which we have chapters. And hopefully, as we continue to grow with our lawyer chapters, we want to serve the broader legal profession as well.
So I want to talk about the lawyer chapters, but first I want to ask about the conference. I mean, I attend every year, and it seems like the crowd it feels different every year. So is this for students? Is it for practicing lawyers? Is it for members of the public who are interested in issues of liberty, of freedom, of constitutionalism? Who would would the general public, would it be accessible to them? what can you tell me about who Law and Freedom is for?
We certainly don't exclude anyone from attending Law and Freedom. Our topics are very legally focused. Some would say they're a little bit nerdy. And so maybe someone walking in off the street might not get the same takeaway that someone who is a lawyer or a law student would. But certainly we want it to be a place for those who are intellectually curious. And so while most people who attend are either law students or law professors or lawyers, we do have other people. We have a number of physicians who attend every year, a number of political scientists and people from other backgrounds. And so it is widely available, and there are still tickets left. And so we hope that anyone who's interested will join us this year.
If people want to get tickets, where do they go? How do they
go to our website, runnymedesociety.ca, and right at the top there we have a link to our conference page where they can purchase tickets.
Well, I'm really looking forward to it. As you said, I'm going to be moderating a panel on Section 15. There's been a fascinating development in equality, the law of equality, with a new case called Sharma, which modifies the test from another case called Fraser. And there's a big Section 15 case that the Canadian Constitution Foundation is hopefully going to be involved in the new year. Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where we are chatting with National Director of the Runnymede Society, Kris Kinsinger. Now, Kris, we have talked briefly in the last segment about how Runnymede now has lawyers chapters. What can you tell me about the growth of these lawyers chapters and what you're hoping to achieve with them? What do they do?
So as I said earlier, Christine, Runnymede was founded in 2016 primarily as a law student organization. Of course, our events, such as our Law and Freedom Conference, brought together a lot of lawyers. But since that time, it's now been 7 years since our founding, and we've had a lot of those first cohort of Runnymede students write their bar exams and get called to the bar, and now they're lawyers themselves. And so the Lawyer Chapter Initiative was really created to allow those members to continue to belong to Runnymede and continue to engage with the work of our organization, while also hopefully bringing in people who went to law school perhaps at a time when there wasn't the Runnymede Society, but who nevertheless share our organization's commitments and want to be involved. And so really what our goal is to create resources for lawyers, particularly through continuing professional development events. Lawyers in a lot of different provinces need to have a certain number of those CPD hours that they have to get in every year. Yes.
I just finished mine in December.
As did I. I always leave it till the end, but we want to ensure that we are creating programs so that people who are interested in these issues are able to get their CPD hours in that way.
And some of the events are fantastic. I've been to the Lawyers Chapter's events. I've been to several events with judges, a judge from the Court of Appeal of Ontario, a judge from the Federal Court of Appeal. So really fantastic content at these conferences. Now, between practice and law school, some Runnymede students do something called clerkships. Clerking is very prestigious.
It is.
It's when a law student works for a judge, a sitting judge, and helps do research and helps with the drafting of opinions sometimes. Some Runnymede students have even gone on to clerk for Supreme Court justices. So what can you tell me about the clerking experience for students and the value of having so many Runnymede clerks? Because there have been a number.
So earlier, Christine, you were talking about how our events are very much the result of a student initiative. And that's what I love about Runnymede is we very much are a grassroots organization. And students come in who share these commitments and they really just go out with their chapters and they put on these amazing events. And because of that, we are attracting very smart students, very high caliber students, and many of them have gone on and they've qualified for these clerkships. And for those who don't know, often clerkships are completed either as part of a student's articling requirement before they're called to the bar, or sometimes immediately following. And so we've been very fortunate in that regard that we have had multiple Runnymede past student chapter executives and students go on and clerk. Just this past round of hiring, we had 3 of our students get hired to the Supreme Court, which is fantastic.
Incredible.
And so we're very supportive of our students in that regard, and we're very proud of all the work that they're doing. And we hope that they'll continue to do after they complete their clerkships and as they go on to pursue their careers in private practice.
Yeah, you should be proud of that because that's an amazing accomplishment. Yeah. How did you become interested in this world of commitment to these values? Why are these values of constitutionalism, rule of law, and fundamental freedoms Why do they matter to you?
I got introduced to Runnymede during my second and third year of law school. As a student, I felt very much at home in my law school, and I felt supported by my law professors, even though a lot of the work that I was doing maybe was a little bit outside of the norm with my interests on certain issues such as religious freedom and the relationship between religious freedom and equality. And so finding Runnymede was like kind of like finding a home, finding an organization where people were also interested in those things and who supported me in the work that I was doing and wanted to engage on a very real and substantive level with that work. So it was a very natural jump for me to go from that as a great admirer of Runnymede to when the opportunity presented itself to become the national director of this organization.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to date myself, but a Runnymede did not exist when I was in law school. And I really wish that it had, because the events that your organization puts on are fantastic. The network that you've built is incredible. So I want to commend you on all the work that you've done to grow this fantastic organization and the influence that you have on Canadian legal culture. Thanks so much, Kris.
Thanks for having me on, Christine.
We've heard today about the goals and successes of the Runnymede Society and the role that they play in Canada's legal culture. Runnymede is a project that I am passionate about, and it's a project of the Canadian Constitution Foundation, which is the charity I work for. What do you think of this project, its goals, and its progress? You be the judge. Thanks for watching, and remember, a freer Canada starts with you.